Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast with Benji Naesen. This is our Giro d'Italia 2020 Stage 13 recap brought to you by our partner L'Ecole. We also have an interview with Jack Haig on Mitchelton Scott, who was at this Giro d'Italia before the team had to pull out of the race, I think, at the end of the first week. And we've got that interview in the second half of this podcast. We've got the timestamps down below if you need to follow them. But as you know, our Giro show is made possible by our partner L'Ecole. They produce performance cycling apparel, road cycling only. They supply the kit to Bahrain McLaren in the World Tour peloton. You can see them, Bilbao and third on GC right now, wearing that L'Ecole kit. And if you want to check out their kit, you can find it at www.lecole.cc, lecol.cc. Enter the discount code, especially for Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast listeners, all caps LR Giro 15 for 15% off at the checkout. Onto the race, stage 13 from Cervia to Monselice, 192 Ks long, Carpaccio flat for the first 160 Ks, and then two climbs. Roccolo, 4.3 Ks at 8%, category 4, and descent short valley, category 4 climb again, the Caluone, 2 Ks at 9.9%. Descent, then a flat run in of about 17 to 18. Oh, it says 12 Ks, but including the descent, it was a run in of about 15 to 16 Ks into the finish after they finished that last climb. There were two intermediate sprints. The first one, 116 Ks in. But yeah, breakaway went Benji. We didn't think a break was going to win today, to be honest, but a breakaway did go nonetheless. It has to go every day.
Yes, and in there was the rider I was talking about, I think last podcast, when I said Bidar was in the breakaway yesterday. Today, his teammate Bouchard was in there. I was talking about him, that he wasn't in the breakaway yet, and that I expected him earlier on in this Giro to play a bigger role in breakaways and go for KOM, because he was my KOM call, and I bottled it there. Anyway, Simon Pelot once again in the breakaway. He looks to be fighting for those kilometer points as well in that classification, but also for another classification. I'll talk about it in a second. Ravanelli for Androni once again. Third day for him in the breakaway. Contreras, I think that's his first day. Tonelli in there as well for Bardiani. Van Hoeke for Lotto Soudal, so this is their GC guy. Pretty good ride from him. And Rota as the final breakaway member for Vinny Zabu. So a breakaway of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 today. They didn't really get a real gap. I think that Bora was controlling in the peloton pretty well, and once and so on, we saw that Ineos was also in that train, perhaps for Swift, and also UAE, who was more likely going to go for the likes of a Diego Ulissi. Demare had his team not really pacing the stage, and we said that yesterday that we didn't expect it really. We didn't expect Demare to start pacing or controlling the stage because the finish is a bit too hard for him. And therefore, he shouldn't use his riders before he gets potentially dropped on one of the latter climbs. Try the parcours, intermediate sprints, and one was taken by Simon Pelot, and that's where that other classification comes in. There's so many classifications here, like, I can't even follow anymore. We spoke about so many in the preview as well. You've got a classification for the kilometers that people are in breakaways. You've also got a classification, the super fighter, or whatever it's called. And that is for the points you get in the breakaway and intermediate sprints. And I think that Sagan was in the lead there yesterday. I don't know if Simon Pelot got closer there because Pelot took the points here. I would have to take a look at that, and I'll try to prepare myself on that niveau for tomorrow's podcast. Well, won't matter tomorrow with the time trial, but I'll try and talk about it on the day after the Piancavello stage, just to let you guys know what that classification is and who is leading that. But outside of that, the only person that really mattered before the climb started was Demare taking 1 point at an intermediate sprint for the actual sprinting jersey. So many classifications. And Sagan never really sprinted for that one. But we started climbing the first ascension, and that was with about a good 30 kilometers to go. That climb is in the terrain. It is that 4 kilometer climb, pretty steep sections, 20% max, and one portion of a good 2 kilometers, 1.5 kilometers at 13.7% average. So yeah, that climb is honestly quite a bit harder than I was anticipating previously when I said Demare could win this stage. I think I said that on yesterday's occasion. And on the climb itself, Bora was really pushing it. Bora was trying to push it to try and drop Demare, but I'm going to throw it to you. Did they succeed?
Well, they did succeed, but I mean, imagine picking Demare to win a hilly stage. I mean, only an idiot would do that. Considering, but Bora had Matteo Fabro lighting it up, and all was going to plan for them. They had Demare dropped. He was 30 seconds back. I think he lost 30 seconds on that first climb. He did have teammates with him. They dropped him, but the problem was for Bora Hansgrohe, well, okay, you drop him on the climbs, but then have you got the engines and the firepower to actually maintain that gap? Because the finish is so far from the second to last climb. And all they had really was poor old little Matteo Fabro, I think, pacing on the front, because the other riders in the team, Micah and Conrad, are sitting in because they're riding for GC, so they're not going to help Sagan. So Sagan is kind of difficult for Bora, and they feel like they made a mistake today, miscalculating how difficult this parkour was and the riders they would have to actually work for Peter Sagan, because they got to that before they even got to the last climb. FDJ had caught back up because Fabro, or whoever it was for Bora, was pulling so gently on the front because he was tired that he couldn't maintain that gap, and FDJ caught them easily, really, before that last climb. And Demare was actually able to move right to the front, still with two men with him. And I guess UAE hadn't helped at all. They weren't helping. They had Ulysses as a favourite. Taconic Quickstep they'd paced a little bit, but hadn't helped too much. They get onto the final climb, and it immediately becomes apparent that this climb is very, very difficult and has really, really steep pinches in it. There was a 500-metre section from 500 metres to a K into the climb, was averaged about 14% gradient in a 2-kilometre climb. So Sagan is good at like 1K, 1.5K, 7%. He's still very good, as we saw the other day. But this is now getting into different territory where it's GC guys, pure climbers coming into play on a climb like this. And that's who we saw, really. It was Diego Ulysses, a guy who does really well in Gran Piemonte, attacking initially. He got brought back by Ruben Guerrero in the Maglia Azzurra, and then Almeida followed him. I think Quickstep wanted to get more bonus seconds for Almeida today. That was their main plan. And pretty much everyone got dropped that wasn't a GC contender, except for Diego Ulysses and a few of the Quickstep boys. So we had this big GC group that follows this Ulysses move. Sagan gets dropped. He gets spat out the back pretty far, actually. Not even that far ahead of Arnaud Demare, who's also like way out of the picture. And then they've obviously caught the break at this point. All the GC guys follow the move of Ulysses. You got Bilbao, Kelderman, Micah, Hindley, Conrad, Almeida and Mario Rosa, obviously. And Almeida's got with him, I think, Honore, and if I'm not wrong, he had a couple of other Quickstep riders with him as well. I think it was James Knox, maybe. Yeah, it was Knox and Masnada. I think Knox was doing... And then they descend that last climb, and it's Quickstep pacing with Knox and, I think, Masnada and Honore chopping off and swapping turns. Honore, by the way, he's legit. His Giro has been a very, very high level so far this year. And he looks so good today, and he even did the lead out today. But Benji, what was the reason that Quickstep was pacing there? Why were Quickstep pacing, not UAE? With Sagan behind, with Ballerini on his wheel in that group, I guess, what's the rationale for Quickstep doing all that work for 16 Ks?
Well, I'm not sure this is the exact reason why they do it, but I would think that if they don't bring Sagan to the sprint nor Ballerini, that Almeida has an opportunity of getting a podium once again. We know he's one of the fastest of the GC members together with Conrad. Ulysses in that group as well, so that is a potential top 3. A top 3 means you get bonus seconds, and we've seen that this man has been trying to get bonus seconds throughout this whole Giro already, because on the 4th stage, he sprinted with Caicedo for 2 seconds. He got third twice already, so that's twice 4 seconds. If he gets a podium on this stage, then he'd be getting bonus seconds once again. And if that's, for example, a third spot, he'd be having 14 seconds already in total throughout this whole Giro. If he gets second, that would be 16 seconds. And if he actually magically ends up beating Ulissi and Conrad in the sprint, then he can get 10 seconds and a stage win. So I believe that they chose Almeida over Ballerini because they could add more seconds. Because just in case that this Giro does end up ending on Piancavallo, he's going to need every single second he can get. And this will help. But the trade is that you're losing domestique power for the coming days. But then again, tomorrow's a time trial. They can rest a bit. So I'm not sure that trade-in is going to be too harsh on the domestiques side. So for me, it's probably that they're trying to get as many seconds in as possible before they get to Piancavallo, just in case the third week doesn't happen. And otherwise, every second gained is an extra second you have to try and defend in that third week, which, like, those 16 seconds or those 14 seconds or those 10 seconds, we don't know where he will end in the stage yet. Those seconds will matter throughout the third week. They're not much, but it's honest work. So I believe that is potentially the reason they were doing that and choosing to leave Ballerini behind, who could potentially win the sprint against Sagan, but it would have been a close one either way.
Chasing behind was Sagan, with the help eventually of Ineos working for Ben Swift, who is kind of good in stages like this too. They had Castroviejo pulling, so I thought it was all looking rosy for Sagan. But they weren't making any inroads, and I think this was a clear case of Knox, you saw on the front for Quickstep. He's just obviously not as good at time trials through an engine as Castroviejo, but you got to look at the context in which he's pulling, where he's probably quite fresh relative to Castroviejo, having gone over that climb pretty easily with the GC group, and he's pulling to the maximum, whereas Castroviejo was probably a little bit cooked, and he's been in the break for a few days. So that gap actually kept expanding out. So eventually Sagan attacked with Thomas de Gendt, and then Ballerini was on his wheel, and Ballerini was getting a free ride the whole time. It made no sense that de Gendt was pulling unless was just friendly with Sagan and wanted to be nice for Peter Sagan, because he had no chance of winning the stage. The gap was with 4Ks to go was about 30 seconds, and then they didn't really make much impression on it at all. So clear that it was going to be a sprint then between the GC guys and Diego Ulissi. Ulissi was clearly, in my view, the favourite for the sprint out of that group, but it wasn't that short odds, by the way, in the live betting markets. He was still 3-1 out of that group. Patrick Conrad took second, winning the bunch sprint, by the way, out of the GC guys earlier in this Giro. I think that was in stage 5 when Ganna won. Conrad won that bunch sprint ahead of Almeida and Kelderman to Camigliatello Silano. So I didn't think it was a lay-down misère that Almeida is some Alaphilippe level reduced bunch sprinter, or Valverde. I don't think he's not that rider. I actually think he's more of he's got a better engine in him than some of the other guys, but still has a good punch. But he's not as good as Ulissi as a sprinter, that's for sure. Ulissi was the favourite, and in the sprint, it was Honoré that Quickstep held back in the last couple of Ks. He did a very, very strong lead out for Almeida, maybe too strong, actually, when we see what happens. He leads out. He's got Ulissi on his wheel. Ulissi had actually, in one of the last corners in the last 700 metres, slipped up onto his wheel ahead of Almeida. Almeida's third wheel in the Maglia Rosa behind him. Then Conrad, fourth wheel for Bora Hansgrohe. Honoré leads it out. Ulissi comes off his wheel pretty late. Almeida's on Ulissi's wheel, tries to come around him and just can't. And then Conrad actually comes with a late surge on the barriers. Everyone sprinted straight, by the way. Magic sprint from all of them. And Conrad surged to the line, but it was too late. Ulissi won by 2/3 of a bike wheel to Almeida, and Almeida came second by about 3 inches to Conrad. Quite difficult to call at the line. But when you look at the overhead shot, you can see that Almeida was not actually continuing to accelerate past Ulissi at that point. He was finished, and it was actually Conrad that was going to probably win that sprint if it went for another 15 or 20 metres. So it was almost Honoré's lead out was too good, and if he left Ulissi in the air a little bit sooner, maybe Almeida could have won this. But that's not a mistake by Honoré by any means. I think he did a magic job, and they really wanted to win the stage. They actually probably should have sprinted for Honoré. out of that group. I think he's got a better sprint than Almeida. And also the other option was soft pedal at the front with Knox and Honore and Masnada when you've got that gap after the climb. Makes Sagan chase you, brings Ballerini back, and then I think Ballerini would have been the clear favourite if Sagan would have had to have done all that work, bringing them back. It's a tough decision to make. You've got a decision between a uncertain probability of a stage win for Ballerini doing that, and probably a very high likelihood if you don't do that and you pace of ensuring that Almeida gets bonus seconds, and it's probably going to come first, second, or third in the reduced bunch sprint. So I don't think it's a disaster either way. I maybe value a stage win, maximising stage win potential a little bit more than the bonus seconds, and I would have liked to have seen them ride for Ballerini. But then again, the Giro is, and the importance of the races, the importance of the Maglia Rosa in the leader's jersey is, for most people in the teams, probably above that. So I don't think it was a massive mistake from Quickstep. Do you think it would have been a mistake to let Ballerini come back, Benji?
Well, in hindsight, no, but you obviously can't say that beforehand because right now, I think Ballerini would have gotten a top 2 anyway against Sagan. Whether that would be first or second, I still believe that GC is more important than stage wins. Maybe I'm a bit of the opposite in the opinion here then. I feel like the main goal right now for the Koenig must be protecting Almeida. This rider is in a position that he never thought that he'd be in. The team would not think that they'd be in this position with Almeida. Perhaps if Evenepoel started here, they were already prepared to have something like this, and in that case, Almeida would have been an extra domestique, or the other way around if Almeida displayed a better form throughout the first 2 weeks. So, yeah, I feel like the Koenig is put in a position where they have a pink jersey that is displaying the skill of potentially having a top 5 at the end of this Giro, and it's looking more and more likely to me personally that he is coming close to a top 5 possibility here. So they're technically making sure that the people are, perhaps if he loses pink, he might still be a place higher because of the bonus seconds at the end of the Giro. So maybe they're already thinking about the other places as well, not directly about winning this Giro, but about getting as much time in as possible to make sure that as little people as possible can pass him in the third week.
Well, I think they're putting him in the best place to win this Giro because if there's a lot of positive COVID tests on the second rest day, and they've put him in a good position where he keeps the Maglia Rosa on Piancavallo because he's gained so much time, then he would win the Giro. So I think they're doing the right thing, probably, when you consider all of it. Tomorrow is stage 14. Speaking of Almeida gaining more time, the individual time trial from Conegliano to Valdo Biadene, 34.1 Ks this time trial. It is actually not an easy one. It's a difficult one once again. You've got false flat uphill for the first 6 Ks. Then you've got the Muro di Ciad del Poggio, 1.1 Ks at 12.1% average gradient. K1 points at the top of that. It's category 4. You've then got a plateau, down, gentle false flat downhill. You've got an intermediate time check at 17 Ks in. Sorry, there was an intermediate time check at the top of that climb, by the way, 7 Ks in. Second one's at 17. Third one is at 24.5 at Col San Martino. And then they start another climb and climbing again. And they do the Guia climb, 2.2 Ks at 5.4%. And then rolling terrain downhill into the finish with a bit of an uphill kick to the line as well. And I got a man for the stage win tomorrow, Benji. It's Joao Almeida, I think, is going to beat Ghana tomorrow. 34 Ks long, this TT, longer than the Imola one, and it's a lot rollier than the Imola one. Ghana on that 12% climb, and it's not just that climb as well. Or do you think I'm just trying to be contrarian just to be interesting, Benji?
I don't know. You've got a possible rider that can do well here. It's a bit unclear whether on the prologue he was seriously benefited by the weather. If that's the case, his time trial will be disappointing here. If not, he could be up there. And therefore, I'm still going to keep myself at Ghana. I believe that he's going to win this time trial. But I have one question for you that you might be able to answer. You've got this time trial. You've got a hill of 12.1%, a 12-cat climb, 1.1 kilometer, one you said. Now, there's 6 kilometers of flat before that. I've heard people talk about a double bike change, or starting on a normal bike and changing after the climb. Do you believe that a bike change is going to benefit? And if yes, will a double bike change even benefit anymore?
No, I don't think you should double bike change because that's like 25 seconds, 23 seconds guarantee that you'll lose. I think given how we saw how the bike changes play out, they're not as smooth and efficient as we think they might be or hope they'd be, and you're adding a lot more risk as well. So I don't think you should do a double bike change. And then I'd have to look at it. 1.1 Ks at 12.1%. It's probably not long enough, to be honest, because normally the climb needs to be quite long, the time they're on it, for it to be worth it. We're talking like 15 minutes, 17 minutes. But it is quite steep. I don't know. It depends if they've drilled it. If you can do the bike change at keep it to 3 seconds and then do the other bike change, if they start on the road bike, but then they're losing time in the first 6Ks. So I just wouldn't do it because it's very marginal here. It's not clear. Like in the Tour de France stage or the Slovenian Champs, it was obvious that a bike change was optimal. But maybe we'll see it tomorrow. I think Dowsett said that a double bike change was possible. Is anyone going to just try and do a max effort on the Cat 4 to get KOM points?
I don't know. Guerrero might be, but I don't know. I think that Guerrero's got a lot of climbs after this time trial to try and defend that KOM jersey. So perhaps some people will try and go for it, but a 4th cat isn't going to gain him too many points either way. So I think that it might not be worth it, considering all the effort that will have to be spent in the coming days after that.
Yeah, I don't know about this. You are reminding me that Almeida performance in the prologue could have been affected by wind so much. It's hard to say what's going to happen. What's your feeling on the GC contenders' performances tomorrow? Just reminding everybody of where everyone is on GC going into this individual time trial. And sorry, I should have said the top 10 from the stage properly. Today, Ulissi, Almeida, Conrad, Gegenhardt 4th, Honoré 5th. And that'll do for that stage. But GC positions right now is Almeida 1st, Kelderman 2nd, 40 seconds back, Bilbao 3rd, 49 seconds back, Pozzovivo 4th, a minute back, Nibali 5th, Conrad 6th, Hindley 7th, Micah 8th, Masnada 9th, Fulsang 10th, 2 minutes and 26 seconds back, McNulty 11th, 2:45 back. Be interesting to see if he can actually move into the top 4 if he does a really, really, really good performance tomorrow. I think it's certainly possible. I think Fulsang will move up, and I think Pozzovivo might not actually have a completely trash TT. I think he might actually go okay tomorrow, especially on that punchy wall. I don't have a great handle on it, to be honest. I think Bilbao, again, he did a pretty good TT, but he didn't go off a good time. I'd say he'd have to be one of the favourites for the stage as well, and the favourites out of the GC men. Bilbao, he did pretty good time trial in Andalusia, but then that stage 5 Andalusia, I'd encourage you guys, go and look at that profile from Andalusia. It's a bit shorter, but it's got rolly hills in it, and it had a climb in at about 7% average gradient, another one at 10%. And Fulsang came second there. McNulty was 9 seconds behind him. Fulsang nearly won the stage. Bilbao was 3 seconds behind him. So I think Bilbao, Fulsang, McNulty will do really good TTs. Nibali, I don't know how he'll go tomorrow, or Micah or Conrad. There's none are really terrible and none are really outstanding. Or do you think it's more polarised between them, Benji?
I don't think it's going to be polarized, but I think that McNulty is going to make a move into top 10. I believe that the Fulsang Andalusia ITT is a bit overrated in the sense that he was in an extreme form compared to his competitors there. We had the likes of a Jack Haig, a wonderful human that we'll talk about in a second and talk to in a second, coming very close in at Andalusia as well. So I believe that it's very difficult to look at preseason races and base our opinion on it here right now. And definitely considering there's that COVID period in between that might have influenced a lot. We haven't seen an extremely strong full Sagan this Giro, as in battering the rest. He's had mechanicals, of course, but that doesn't really take away from his strength. I just feel like if full Sagan was on the level of his Andalusia compared to his competitors, then he would have tried to attack on one of the hill stages more and try to do damage there. But considering he hasn't, I'm guessing that he couldn't at that point. Now, the likes of Masnada, I don't know about his time trial. I genuinely don't. I don't think it's that amazing. Hindley and Conrad, mediocre in my opinion as well. Micah as well. I think that the better time trialist is indeed going to be Bilbao. I think Kelderman is rather underrated in that, so I think that he's going to surprise us all and come pretty close in there as well. In GC at least, I don't know in the stage itself. And I think that Nibali is like a tiny bit under the qualities of a Kelderman in time trial. I always rate a Nibali on a similar level as Kruiswijk in IT, or just a tiny bit under Kruiswijk. And I think Kelderman's pretty good in time trial as well. He was Dutch champion at one point, if I recall correctly, of time trialing, the one Van Emden didn't win. And Almeida is going to be a mystery. I can't tell you. We've got a time trial, a prologue that was pretty much based on weather conditions so much that it changed by half a minute throughout the whole parcours, or even minutes. And therefore it's unclear whether his skill was what brought him to this position or whether the weather benefited him so much that he's in that position. So I guess we're going to find that out tomorrow as well, which is something I'm very curious about. Let's hope the weather is like even for everybody, because I dislike time trials where it's unfair due to the weather. I have something against it. Obviously, the teams could have changed that on the first stage, but we won't go back into that. We won't beat this dead horse. That's what I'm trying to say. Anyway, I think that Bilbao is going to be the better one out of GC favorites and come pretty close to Almeida in GC. So looking forward to the stage. Honestly, I am looking forward to see the level of GC favorites in ITT. I'm looking forward to Ganna's new victory.
So you think Ganna's going to win?
Yeah, I do.
All right, I'm going to go. I don't think Ganna will win. I don't have a good handle on exactly who will beat him. It could be Almeida. I think Mikkel Bjerg is a really good shout to come at least top 3 in the ITT tomorrow. But that was our Giro d'Italia Stage 13 recap and Stage 14 preview, brought to you by our partner Lacole. Now we're moving on to our interview with Jack Haig of Mitchelton Scott, which we promised at the start of this podcast episode. Welcome back, Jack Haig, to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast. Well, first time you've been on the podcast. Second time you were on the YouTube channel at the start of lockdown, and introduced you to Benji, my co-host. So today we're going to be talking about Jack's Giro d'Italia. If you don't know, Jack Haig is on Mitchelton Scott. He went to the Giro with their team, riding in support of Simon Yates, and I thought maybe going for stage wins after Yates pulled out with the positive COVID test. A lot happened in that first couple of weeks of the Giro d'Italia, and he's been right in the thick of it. So a lot spoken about in the press about whether the Giro is safe or what's been going on, etc. So I thought, instead of us speculating about it like we did a little bit yesterday, why don't we ask a rider that was actually there? So welcome back, Jack. Where are you now? Are you back home in Spain?
Thanks for having me back on. I managed to get home to Andorra, but because of the close contact I had with Simon, as well as some of the other staff members in the team that test positive for COVID, I'm actually staying in a Airbnb about 200 meters away from my apartment, which is a little bit weird, but I'm going to be here for about 7 days, and I'll do another PCR COVID test on Monday. And hopefully if the result comes back negative, I should be able to go home Tuesday afternoon.
Okay, yeah, that sucks, I guess, but at least it's not the full 2-week quarantine. And were you rooming with other riders at the Giro d'Italia, and was that the case in the Tour de France? For some reason, I had in my head that all the riders were in their own individual rooms during the tour. Whereas, was that different at the Giro, or was it the same across both races?
To be honest, I'm not actually sure what Mitchelton did at the Tour de France, whether they were rooming solo or not. I know some teams like Education First, they definitely have solo rooms for every single rider. But at the Giro, we were all sharing rooms. I was sharing with Simon until after the Mount Etna stage. And then from after that stage, I was rooming solo. So Simon had his own room and I was rooming solo, but the other guys were all sharing.
Yeah, and I guess, Benji, remind everyone what came out yesterday. I think there's a more press broke yesterday after we finished recording. I can't remember the exact details between the UCI and Education First, and then maybe remind everyone or tell everyone what the UCI has come out with and said they're going to do now at the Giro going forward, because I think we said they should do certain things, and obviously they listened to the podcast 20 minutes after we uploaded it.
So yesterday we had Education First, who launched a bit of a campaign, is what was listed in articles. They had a bit of an appeal at UCI. They sent a letter to UCI to ask the Giro to be stopped after the Piancavallo stage. So that is a stage on Sunday, the mountain stage of week 2, the only mountain stage in week 2. So they were saying you've got mountain terrain, you've got hill terrain, you've got a time trial, so there can still be a battle for GC, and you'd have it ending this week instead of, obviously, in Milano in about a week and a half now. Now, the UCI pretty much rejected that immediately. I don't think that they went too in-depth into the discussion either. It felt like it was a very quick rejection since it's the same day or something. But they did actually decide, La Passion decided to improve the testing in the sense that they are going to do more tests. And I think they've already done more tests by adding a number of rapid tests in between. Once again, I'm not a scientist. I won't pretend to be. So don't ask me how good certain tests are, how good PCR tests are, and so forth. But they're improving that testing and so forth. Now, did you have anything to add to that, or is that about what you meant me to say?
Yeah, I think that's all that came out. And also, sorry, Venue, the RCS, the head of RCS, came out with a statement saying, continuing like the Cold War political themes of all these statements that come from either the head of the UCI or RCS. He was like, the teams complaining are a destabilizing political force trying to upend the power structure that is in cycling. I think Jack and I spoke about sort of the power imbalances when we spoke at the start of lockdown. But Jack, 2-week Grand Tour, do you think, would that actually be fair if they called it on the second rest day? Would you just put an asterisk on the guy that won overall, or would you just say, hey, this was a failed attempt at a Grand Tour? No, there's no winner.
It's an interesting one because I think you also had maybe a similar situation in Paris-Nice a little bit earlier on this year where the final stage was cancelled and there was also a few teams that didn't go. Mitchelton was part of that was part of one of the teams that didn't go. So I think for a Grand Tour, yeah, it'd be difficult to call a winner after 2 weeks, but I think it could be a good compromise considering what has happened with the COVID, as well as, I guess, some of the bad weather that is also forecast for the third week. But it's a very, very tough call to make because obviously the prestige and what makes a Grand Tour is the length.
Yeah, and also you might have Nibali turning around saying, well, I've been riding in the wheels, chilling for 2 weeks, reserving energy for that third beast week, and I didn't care about the Maglia Rosa, and Quick-Step had been burning all their matches with Almeida, going for every sprint and bonus seconds to keep the Maglia Rosa, and he was going to, the theory being Almeida's going to fade away in the third week. So, yeah, it would be unfair to somebody, but sometimes life is just unfair. You know, Calder's around last year, Simon Yates, I think it was clear on that stage, and yeah, the stage got cancelled because they couldn't really do anything else about it. But in the Giro, Jack, there's been a lot of press about, there's been members of the public at buffets in the hotels, etc. Then Sunweb came out today and said, well, our team was never sharing that buffet. was your sense, I remember we were talking before it kind of blew up, that it was your sense that it was not a great control situation at the Giro re-COVID and managing that, compared to maybe what you heard about how ASO managed it at the Tour?
I can't comment too much on how ASO handled the Tour, as I wasn't there and I didn't actually talk to many riders about it. But at the Giro, the first hotel, we did have quite a few teams sharing, as well as the race organization. I think maybe it was Mitchelton, Bora, Ineos, and RCS were all sharing the same hotel. So, and the kind of Quick Step were also there. So it's 4 teams and the race organizers at quite a big hotel. And obviously, Ineos and Bora both have kitchen trucks as well as food trucks. So all their riders were eating inside their trucks, but their staff were still sharing the same buffet. And then for the riders of Mitchelton and Quickstep, we both have chefs, and then they obviously give a buffet for just the riders, but then the staff are using the buffet or the hotel or getting table service.
Fair enough. Okay, so it sounds like some teams are taking, or have maybe the financial means to take more precautions. Do you think there's a divide in the peloton in the attitude towards COVID? I mean, it's a lot of different riders from different backgrounds that make up the pro peloton. I guess there'd be some people who are like, this is my livelihood, I need to pay my mortgage, I've got a kid on the way or something, let me race the Giro. I'm more scared about crashing at 80 kilometers an hour and breaking every bone in my body than COVID. So just let me race. And then I presume, obviously, there's other riders who are like, this is crazy that we're racing in the middle of a pandemic with a respiratory illness that's could affect my career if I catch it, because it's sort of not known what the permanent effects could be. Is there that divide, or is it more one or the other in the pro peloton?
There's probably a subtle divide there, where there are riders that are secure with a contract for next year, have jobs, and then there are also riders that are racing to get a result to try and find a contract for next year. And obviously, if the race is cancelled, they're losing that opportunity. But I think everyone is being quite respectful of the hygiene protocols. Like, you see all the riders going to and from sign on, everyone wears a mask. There's always hand sanitizer everywhere. And in terms of, from what I can observe, just in that little start area before the race, everyone is wearing masks and being quite respectful. So it's difficult to say how big that divide is, but I'm sure there are some riders that have in their mind that they're safe next year and they would prefer to eliminate as much risk as possible. But obviously our sport also needs the racing to continue, because if there's no racing, then there's no jobs.
Exactly. It's not just the riders. It's probably RCS employ a lot of people. The race indirectly employs a lot of people, and eventually, the races will just have to continue. Because all you just say cycling cannot continue until the COVID pandemic stops completely. But yeah, Benji, you've got the Tour of Flanders coming up in your neck of the woods this weekend. What sort of have you noticed Flanders Classic doing anything like really over the top in making sure the race is carried out safely? I heard about TV ads or something. I'm obviously not in Flanders and I don't watch your local television, so you're going to have to fill me in here.
From what I know about how Flanders Classic is preparing the Tour of Flanders, we've got, first of all, ads on the internet, ads on TV and so forth about watching it at home. They are really, really putting a real important note on watch at home, don't come to the race, to prevent gatherings at the side of the road and so forth. So that is one of the clear protocols that they're trying to follow as much as possible, because I think there's a meeting from the actual Belgian government tonight with a presentation for the whole country about what the new rules are going to be in the couple of weeks following. And if that will influence Tour of Flanders or not, no clue, because we don't yet know what date those rules would start. So it's going to be a curious evening. Let's hope. Well, I've always got the opinion that you can do measures and so forth, because safety is extremely, extremely important. And you also got to try and keep it so that you don't over measure. So you got to find the balance in between. And it's obviously hard for rule makers to do that. So I won't be judging here on any government campaigns for it. But I think that Tour de Flandre is prepping this really well, and that's not because I'm biased towards the Flemish races or anything. So far, it's looking really good, and I hope that it stays that way and that we see a race that is safe for the riders, safe for the people by the side of the road, and just in general safe, but also well planned and well protocoled. But additionally, I'd like to ask Jack here, do you feel like the people by the side of the road in the Tour of Italy, in the Giro d'Italia, were following protocols, or is it something like a good few months ago in the Route Occitanie, there were cases where half a mountain was wearing no masks and hugging each other? So I want to know whether the public is keeping up with the measures.
There's definitely much less mask wearing in the Giro compared to what I noticed at the first race that I came back to at Vuelta a Burgos. There, every person on the side of the road, even in the middle of nowhere in Burgos, they were wearing a mask. In Italy, during the Giro, it was maybe between 40% not wearing a mask, 60% wearing a mask, or people wearing the mask sort of incorrectly or on their chin or something like this, which doesn't really help. But I'm not sure whether the danger to us as riders comes from so much that gathering. It's more probably the general population that is gathering there. Whereas when we're riding past so fast, I'm not sure. Obviously, like you said before, we're not scientists or doctors or anything. But if I was to have a guess, it's not going to impact us as much as the gathering that was there. And I think a good point you made before about the Flanders Classics is we're trying to, or race organisers are trying to figure out that correct balance. And I don't think anyone believes the virus is going to go away. But I think with more time, that balance will be better, and we'll come up with a common ground that is good enough for all the race organisers, the TV coverage, the general public, that we can have a safe, organised event.
But that's enough COVID talk. Too much of it always dominates.
True.
Even when the racing is on, it just dominates everything. Let's talk about some hope. Jack, next year, Bahrain, McLaren, big move for you going there next year. Got a multi-year deal there. How long is it for? 3-year deal at Bahrain,
Yeah.
McLaren? I've seen reported. What's the goal for you next year? Is it to be a 100% leader in just 1 week races like you were at, I think, and what was it, Andalusia this year? Or has there been an agreement or a discussion about you being a supported leader at a Grand Tour next year?
Well, there's still a lot of planning to go ahead for next year. One, we need to finish this year and wait and see what the racing actually is going to look like for next year. I know the calendars have been released, but like everything that is going on at the moment, we need to see and assess the situation, as well as the team is recruiting new riders. And depending on the final composition of the Bahrain McLaren team next year will determine a little bit of what my role will be. Obviously, they still have Mikel Landa next year and Pello Bilbao. Both of them, especially Pello at the moment, is performing super well. So there's some support that I can also have there, but hopefully I'll get some leadership in the week-long races, similar to what I had at the beginning of this year with Valencia and Ruta del Sol, and then potentially go in as a co-leader into a bigger race. But we'll have to wait and see until the final planning's made there.
And say if you were like a rider out of contract, is it better making more money in the long run? Because no one knows what any salaries are in the World Tour. It's not like the NBA where every single salary is publicised. Is it better to maybe take a 2-year deal at a team where, I'm trying to think of a better example of a rider that's done this recently. Maybe even Carapaz, who's gone to Movistar initially, gets that opportunity to actually lead Movistar. Well, he wasn't even leading Movistar at the Giro. He just decided he was leading them in 2019. Ends up winning the race, and then that next contract at Ineos, I assume, is just massive. Whereas maybe other riders, if they don't change teams, they sort of accept the situation they're in at a team, and then maybe they get okay results, but they're mainly a support rider, but they maybe get a better salary than they would have if they went to a Movistar or a different team. Do you think riders are making decisions like that regularly about leadership opportunities and taking pay cuts so that then, sorry, I'll rephrase that. Is there such a big difference between the pay for a guy who takes out maybe second in Paris-Nice and then third at the Vuelta compared to someone who maybe consistently wins a few one pro races, maybe third in Paris-Nice, but then fifth in Lombardia, etc.? Is there a really big gap between those two salaries?
Like you said, it's quite difficult to judge even as a rider in the pro peloton to know the salaries. Everyone's somewhat secretive about it all, and I don't think anyone really knows other than the really big management companies that manage a lot of riders. And it also really depends on that contract year. Say, for example, this year, there's a massive amount of riders on the market. So then your value goes down because everyone is looking for a contract. Whereas in other years when maybe there isn't so many riders on the market, you can bring your value up. And it also depends on what some of the bigger teams are looking for. For example, with Ineos, Jumbo, and maybe even UAE now after Pogacar at the Tour de France, these guys are probably looking for those sort of second tier climbers that aren't quite GC leaders or are willing to sacrifice that GC leadership to support a rider. And those teams can afford to pay extra. So it's a bit of a tricky balance there. And for example, like going to somewhere like Ineos, where a lot of people say maybe you lose the opportunity, and it really depends on maybe the age and what your desires are. If you're a super competitive person, you might choose not to go to Ineos and go to somewhere like Movistar and take more opportunity and less money, especially if you're a younger rider. Whereas maybe if you're coming through and you're up until your 30s, mid-30s, and you're looking for just stability, a good contract, and to ride it out the year, then yeah, there's a lot of juggling and balancing to go on there.
To put a bit of a spotlight on under 23 riders who might be in a situation where they had no World Championships under 23 to show off their skills, they had no Tour de l'Avenir, if I recall correctly, as well. You were second in Avenir, I think, in 2015, the year before you ventured on to Orica. Do you believe that if you weren't having a Avenir that year, if, for example, COVID struck in that year in 2015, it would have influenced your career a lot?
It's hard to say because I was in quite a fortunate position where Mitchelton actually reached out to me before my Tour de l'Avenir result. They became interested in me after I won the Best Young Riders jersey at the Tour Down Under with UniSA, and then went on to finish third in the Herald Sun Tour. And they allowed me to have an extra year of under 23 because I hadn't really raced in Europe. I'd only raced in Australia on the road, and I'd done mountain biking in Europe. So I was in quite a fortunate position there. So it's kind of hard to say from personal experience, but I would imagine it's much harder, especially this year, for those under 23 riders to showcase their talent and get that contract.
Yeah, I think a similar thing happened with some of the younger Australian guys that got World Tour contract for next year. They did a good job in the Australian races, and there were World Tour teams circling for their contract there. That being said, it's just a shame because you look at 2018 under 23 World Champs road race, you look at who was in the select last group, like Pogacar, Hirschi, Padun, who was in the break yesterday for Bahrain. And you see all those names, and they get that big race experience. And yeah, we didn't get to see that. So I'm sure it will have some sort of effect not having those development races, because honestly, I don't think professional cycling scouting is that good. And I think those big races where it's all televised, a lot of the World Tour teams kind of prick up their ears and go, "Oh, he's pretty good. He came third in that race." Whereas they're maybe not looking at the entire those like Italian circuit. But at Bahrain next year, Jack, how does that actually influence your life moving team from maybe an Australian-based team? You're living in Andorra. They've got a different location for their service course, different team camps. Like, it's different maybe to the NBA where players literally have to move their accommodation to their new city if they get traded, for example. Does anything really change for you other than the location of your winter training camp?
To be honest, it's the first time I've changed teams. I've always been professional with Mitchelton, so it's going to be a bit of a new experience for myself. But so far, because of the COVID situation, there hasn't been so much planning for winter activities yet. I do know that the team has an agreement with a hotel in down near Calpe, and they normally do their winter training camps down there. So I'll have to head down there for that, which is a little bit different. Normally, Mitchelton does just that riding training camp that sort of gets a little bit of media because we end up doing a ridiculous amount of hours in a week, but it's actually quite a fun experience. So not much will change other than the equipment. And there won't actually be another rider, I don't think, living in Andorra because Ivan Cortina is riding for Bahrain this year and lives quite close to me here, but is moving on to Movistar next year.
But just in case it does happen this third week in the Giro, Jack, I don't think people are ready or understand how bad this weather and the weather conditions could be on the Stelvio if it goes ahead. I think, what can we expect to see if it does go ahead from the riders, given that there could be like temperatures of -2 at the top of the Stelvio?
I didn't do the Giro a couple of years ago, but I know that some of the guys in the team were talking about some horror stage they had to do Gavia Stelvio in the snow, and people were getting changed in a hotel at the top of Stelvio. Riders were literally getting off their bike, going into a hotel, getting their rain bag out of the team car, complete kit change from socks to undershirt, and then descending the hill, climbing up the next one, and then doing exactly the same thing again. So in extreme cold weather like that, anything can happen. And it's so easy to not fuel because it's so hard to reach into your pockets and have the dexterity in your hands to open a bar or have a gel, that people can implode really, really quickly.
Thanks again for coming on to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast with me and Benji. Jack, I presume this is season over for you. Actually, you're not doing the Vuelta sneakily next week, are you?
as far as I know, I'm not doing Vuelta. But yeah, my season will be done with the COVID sort of precautionary quarantine that I'm doing at the moment. It's actually not possible for me to go to Vuelta, so it's quite a strange way to finish the season. And it was also my last race with the Mitchelton Scott team, so it was a little bit sad to end this way and not be able to finish on a high note. But yeah, it is what it is. Strange year.